Hi there my friends, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today it's a long video. It's pastel on pastel matte, that's Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, and I'm working on a polar bear today. I hope everyone's keeping well. I am now. I'm over a virus. I might have to stop a couple of times to get a drink because I've had a virus and it's left me with a cough, but apart from that we're good to go. Okay, so as I said, working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper today. If you haven't used this before, it's got sort of a cork texture, but it takes loads and loads of layers and it keeps the vibrancy of pastels where needed. So I've recently been to the Arctic. I was invited on an Arctic expedition in August. Wow, seems longer ago than that now, and I took a lot of reference photos. So the reference photo I used for the background is my own, and the reference photo for the polar bear this time was off unsplash.com. And if you haven't heard of unsplash.com, it's a royalty-free website, the same as pixabay.com, and you're free to use all of the photos on there for your own artworks. Okay, so what I've done, on a separate piece of paper, I sketched out a composition. Then I transferred the finalised lines onto this piece of Clairefontaine pastel matte paper using some graphite trace down. If you haven't heard of that, it's just like a graphite carbon paper. And then I masked out the polar bear because I wanted to keep him nice and fresh. So I just used some Frisket masking film for that. And that way any pastel that actually drops isn't going to contaminate the area where I'm going to be doing the polar bear. So everything in this section's pretty sped up to 300 times, I think I did that, and applied just the soft pastel. So the soft pastel I'm using at the minute and that I use for the sky is the pan pastel soft pastel. And if you haven't heard of that, all it is a soft pastel pigment, and they come in little tubs. They're like little compact makeup compacts. That's what they look like. They're quite expensive. You can buy individual colours or you can buy them in sets, and as I said, they are quite expensive, but they last such a long time. There's so much pigment compacted down into these little tubs that they really are worth the money, and I thoroughly recommend getting them. You can get a starter set of 20 colours, and they mix. You can mix all the colours together, so they're ideal that way. So really that's all you need. But if you're in doubt, you can buy them open stock, which means you can buy the singular colours and just give them a try and see what you think. Okay, so the tools I'm using today are called soft tools. I'll link everything in the video description, and they have little removable and replaceable sock covers. So the soft tools themselves are these plastic things, a little bit like painting with a palette knife when you're using these, and then they're just replaceable foam tips. The tips, depending on how heavy handed down when I'm using them, normally last 2 or 3 paintings, and obviously they you can turn them over, so as you can see the side of the tool that's facing upwards, that's not got any pastel over it. So when the side I'm using gets a little bit worn, and we all get worn out, but they get a little feathering on them, I just pull that little sock off, turn it over, and I can use the other side. And as you see, to get finer details, you can use the edges or just the tips. So I'm going on with a few different colours, and as I said, I'm mixing some myself and just playing about with different tones, different contrasts, trying to keep it all out of focus because we want this mountainous area to feel like it's pushed back into the painting. So just going on with a few darks, a few lights, going between cool blues and even the darker blues. They still have a cool tone about them, and lilacs, and that, because I'm using cool colours, it means everything is pushed towards the background. It looks further away from the viewer. So cool colours, plus out of focus lines and edges just gives a sense of depth. When you want something to look like it's nearer to the viewer, it's nice to crisp up the lines and edges a bit and use warmer tones, but at the moment we don't want to be doing that with the background. So this really is a long video. It's about an hour and a half, I think, so you might want to have it playing in the background while you're doing something else, or sit with a coffee, or sit and read while you're listening to me gabble on, if you can manage that. I couldn't manage that. Hope everyone's keeping well. So a lot of this is really self-explanatory. I do keep pausing because I'm mixing colours on top of the little tubs of pastel. I think it's only the white that I've ever had to replace, and I've had them for about, I don't know, about 7 years maybe. And they're just wonderful. And the pastel matte paper I've taped to a board with some acid-free framers tape, so just to keep it all in place. And it's on my easel, and because I like to work upright, and it's in my new studio. Hooray! If anybody wants to see a studio tour, let me know and I can do a video of that and show people how I store my art materials and everything. So nice to be in my own space now at long last. So I'm getting detail in there, but not too detailed. I want it to show, obviously, contrast. You need contrast in a painting to make it look feasible, I guess, to make it look like it's real. So it's really nice because in some areas I do leave the white of the paper showing through, just to give that added contrast in the background. And obviously, as always, to the lower left hand side, although it does move up to the top left hand side later on in the video, is the finished painting, so at least you can see what I'm aiming for. These pastels are so blendable, and they work really, really well with pastel pencils as well. So all pastels, whether they're soft pastels or pastel pencils or pan pastels, they all mix and blend very well. And if you haven't got one, you can always use another. I could have done all the background in pencil. I mean, that's quite feasible, but it would have taken a lot longer. These soft pastels lay down very, very quickly, and it really is like painting with a palette knife if you've ever done that. So fast forwarding a little bit because it's really, much of the same. And dabbing on some texture there that I'd like to remain in the finished painting. And also it stops me from getting carried away and applying too much dark straight away. It's always easier to go lighter, it's always easier to go darker, but sometimes it can be a little bit trickier to go really light if you've already gone too dark, if you know what I mean. So I messed about with the video settings on the editor, on the video editor, so I'm hoping the colour stays true throughout the video. Now, as you can see, as I'm getting closer to the polar bear, I've got no worries now because he's masked out about dirtying the edges or smudging any blues over where I want to place yellows and creams, because obviously that you'd end up getting a green tone then, and I definitely don't want any green colour in the polar bear. So it's just a nice way. I could have worked without masking the polar bear. It just means I would have been very, very more, oh my word. I would have had to have been a lot more careful when I was getting closer to where the polar bear's going to be. If only I could work this quick in real life. So yes, I was in the Arctic for 2 weeks on on a ship called the Hondius, and we circumnavigated Svalbard. It was amazing. We saw 11 polar bears, and I didn't know, but some trips that had gone before us hadn't even seen one, so it was just absolutely amazing. I'm in the process of building a new page on my website at the moment, because what's happening is I was taken over to the Arctic, I was sent to the Arctic, just to have a look, to see what the ship was like, to see how everything works over there, to see the light, because it's 24-hour daylight, where it was when I went. It was quite strange standing on the deck of the ship at midnight and it was still sunny. It was amazing. But the idea is for next year, so 2024, for me to go back over to the Arctic, but take some people with me, or to join up with some people that have booked on the trip. And on sea days, because there's days during the trip where you're literally at sea. There's no landings on the ice shelves or anything like that, and it would just be nice for people, if they want to bring along their art equipment, that we'll be able to do workshops or paint-alongs and things like that. So that's the idea. So wildfoottravel.com, I'll put their link in the description as well, are arranging all of this to happen for next year. Looks like it's going to be June. Dates in June have been mentioned, but if you want to check with me on social media or keep an eye on my website, as soon as everything's finalised, all the details will be there. And obviously I'll be doing more intros with videos and things like that on YouTube, so just keep your eyes open and your ears open, and if that's something you're interested in, just drop a line down below as well in the comments. It was really nice because whilst in the Arctic, because we were so far north, right near the North Pole, there was no internet, and the ship's internet was intermittent, obviously because of where we were. No phone signals, which was lovely. I couldn't use my mobile phone for 2 weeks, so no one could contact me. It was really nice, not having to check emails and things like that, because I'd obviously pre-warned everybody that I wouldn't be accessible as such. But whilst there, I got some painting done, which was lovely, and those paintings have now gone over to a company in the Netherlands, so that's nice, and I posted them on the 13th of last month and they still haven't arrived, so it's a slow process. But lovely people, amazing people. Okay, back to the painting, less of the Arctic and back to the painting. So yeah, this was inspired by the trip, definitely, and I do have some amazing photographs of the polar bears from the trip, so hopefully later this year we're in October, but later this year I will be doing some paintings of Arctic foxes, polar bears, walruses, bearded seal, all the species that I saw whilst I was out there. Even got to see Brunix guillemot, a bird, and just phenomenal. Arctic puffins, which are bigger than the puffins we see here in the UK. Wild reindeer. So I've got lots of reference images now, just spoilt for choice. So I just need to find somewhere now that sells 72-hour days, and I'll be happy. So this is really just rinse and repeat. It's the same. Putting the lights in first where I want to retain the lights. So if I need really white, some places I do leave the white of the paper showing through. Other places I do pop some white on. And you can see the difference between, on the original painting, on the finished painting, you can see where the paper is just slightly a different white to the white pastel I'm putting on. So it's even in the lightest of places on the snow-capped mountains at the background, you can just see the differences in the white. and it just gives it that added bit of visual impact, I guess. And I'm not copying the reference image exact. Obviously, this painting is all about the polar bear in its own environment, and it's really getting that environmental feel to the painting, the cold tones and hues. And polar bears are definitely not white. I already knew that. I'd photographed polar bears here in the UK at safari parks, so I knew polar bears weren't white. But I don't think, until you see them in snow and on the ice, you don't realise just how not white they are. Because obviously a polar bear's skin is black, its fur is translucent really, so reflects lots of colours around it. And they really do have this creamy look about them. So when we were on the ship and we were travelling through ice packs and along the ice sheets, we were actually looking for creamy specks in the distance. That's apparently how they spot polar bears in the distance. They just look for these creamy coloured blobs in the distance, and hopefully it's a polar bear. We saw polar bears feeding on whale carcass, which was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. We were in little Zodiac boats, so they'd taken us out from the main ship, the Hondius, towards the ice floe so we could get a better look at these polar bears. Obviously you can't land because the bears are so dangerous. I'm not going to put anybody's life in danger by doing that, and obviously we don't want to disturb the bear either. But from the Zodiacs, we were sort of bobbing about in the water, trying to get really good photos that way. But he was oblivious really to us being there, which was better. You know, you don't want to be disturbing them. And he was oblivious. He was eating, feeding away, and just living his life in such harsh conditions. It's phenomenal that they survive. It really is. Going in with a soft tool again, using a little bit of a cool grey up there, and if I do go too dark, obviously I can blend it back into the white that I've already placed up there. So this painting is going with me to be exhibited later on this month, 2 weeks time. I'll be exhibiting at the Northwest Bird Watching Festival. That's it. So taking a lot of original paintings with me. Yes, there will be a lot of bird paintings there, but there'll also be things like this that I'll be taking with me as well. So looking forward to that. That's at WWT Martin Mere, so it's in Lancashire, and it's on the 14th and 15th of October, so just less than 2 weeks to go. So it's sitting in my studio now waiting to be framed. I'll get some better photographs of the finished painting before I frame it, and then it'll be off to the exhibition. Looking forward to that. Now, as you can see, I can lean my hand on the masked out polar bear, and none of the oils from my hand will be going onto the paper because of the Frisket masking film, which is good. You can either do that, so if you are working on a bigger project, and you need to rest your hand, there's a couple of things you can do to get around that, so you're not resting your hand directly on the paper. You can use a mole stick, which is a stick with a bobbly bit on the end, and you rest that on your easel or on your board, and then you rest your hand or your arm on the mole stick itself. I think they were originally designed by sign painters, people that used to make signs for shops and things. Or what I tend to do is use a piece of glassine paper. It used to be called butcher's paper, and it's a non-transferable paper, so it's a paper where you can actually lean it on your work or tape it to your work, and then you can lean on that. It's acid free. I use the one made by Clairefontaine, but there's all different brands. You can get it on Amazon and places like that. And because it's non-transferable, it doesn't actually pick up anything. So it won't pick up the pastel. If I need to lean over a part of my painting that's already completed, I can put the glassine paper on that and then lean on it to steady my hand, and it won't pick up or smudge anything underneath it. You can rest it on graphite, you can rest it on painted areas if you're working with acrylics or watercolours. As long as they're completely dry, it won't pick up anything. So just working down, gradually leaving the darks behind in this area now. So I want it to look like the snow has been blown in, or swept in and covered the bottom areas of that mountain. Just blurring out the edge of that mountain there. I thought it was looking a little bit too crisp, and obviously any crisp edges are going to look like they're nearer to you, and I definitely didn't want that appearance. So you will find that I do sort of nip from one area of a painting to another, especially as I'm nearing the completion of a painting, because as you step back and step away from your work and look at it from a distance, or what I tend to do is take a photograph of it on my phone and then look at it on a small screen, you do see areas of a painting that need a little bit more work, whether that's balancing the contrast. Balancing composition, you pretty much, that should be done in the initial sketch stages, but balancing colour, balancing tone, balancing contrast, balancing out hues throughout a painting, that's what I like to do as I'm moving through a painting. So you might see me skip about a bit, but I will try and remember what I was doing when I do that during this video. I've tried to edit out all of the parts where I'm not actually doing anything, because it's probably I'm looking at the reference image a little bit more, or might be having some coffee. But with it being such a long video, I do hope I've edited out that. And I've not got any music to play for you during those parts, so I'll just have to ramble a little bit more if there are any. I don't think there are, but just in case. Going on with the darks again. In some areas it was okay to go in quite dark to begin with. If I was confident that was going to be an area where there wasn't going to be very many lights, then I was more than happy just to go straight in with a darker pigment. If by any chance I did go in, you can't really make a mistake with a mountain because I'm not doing it so detailed that you'd notice, but if I did go in too dark in an area, instead of blending it out with a lighter colour, you can actually use a kneaded eraser, very, very gently, just lean a kneaded eraser into the tooth of the paper and then lift it back off, and that should lighten it somewhat, because there'll be less dark pigment left there, and then you could go over with a lighter colour. And obviously, as I said, all of this background could have been done with pencils. It would just have taken a lot longer. And when using pencils, it can be a little bit more, not difficult, a little bit more, what's the word? Time consuming, I guess, just to get that out of focus background, because you're trying to cover a large area with just the point of a pencil. So it's nice just to use soft pastels when going into a larger area. And they can be any pastels, any soft pastels. They don't have to be pan pastels. You can use Unison. I like to use those. Dahlia and Rowney. Mungio even, the little square ones. As long as they're soft enough not to leave hard edges on the paper, then they would have been fine for doing the background. In the sky, I just used 2 shades of blue, lilac and white for the clouds. But the clouds were just very, very quickly put in between the blues and then just blended out into the blues, just so the clouds are out of focus as well. So don't worry, the whole video isn't just me doing the background. I do come to a finish here and move on to another part, because it's all of the background was done exactly the same as you've seen this process. So if you wanted to just watch the polar bear, then please feel free to fast forward. But the background section is coming to an end. Oh, now that was good timing. Okay, so mid-ground. So this is completely made up out of my imagination. So I didn't have a photograph that I thought would work well in this particular project. So I just used some of the colours from the background, added a little bit of lilac and another light blue. That I think the light blue was the same as that I used in the sky, and just a generalisation of a cold environment. That's all I wanted to create. In the mid-ground, I don't think really people don't really take much notice of what's in the mid-ground anyway. But thinking about how you view a painting, when you look at water, for instance, you want horizontal lines getting closer together the further away from the viewer that you go. And I just used that same principle just to fill in the mid-ground of this painting. So lots of horizontal strokes getting closer together the further away from the front of the painting. So it just leads your eye towards the background. And that is literally, that's all the mid-ground is. I did apply a little bit of a cool pink just in little areas, just to give it a bit of interest. Simples. Back on with a lilac. Obviously if you mix pink and blue you're going to get a lilac, but I did add a lilac as well. And it's the same lilac that I used in the sky, and a tiny amount was used in the mountains as well. A little bit of shadowing, but that all gets pretty much covered over later on. But I just wanted a little bit of a dark going underneath the feet of the polar bear to begin with. And as you can see in the finished painting, the shadowing is put on towards the end of the painting and not now. I just wanted to get all the mid-ground in now. So when I'm working this section to the left of the polar bear, I also then go and work the right-hand section of the mid-ground as well. Just so I've got fresh in my mind which colours are used and which technique I used as well. Because there's nothing worse, and I'm sure we've all done it. You work one section of a painting, then move on to something completely different, and then when you try to replicate as such that same technique that you used earlier, sometimes you can't quite bring it to the front of your mind how you did it, or which colours you used. This for the background, foreground and midground, it is quite a limited palette. There's probably, let's have a look, 1, 2, 3, 6 colours maybe. So there you can see all the midground is done. The foreground has got a very loose coating on it, and now it's time to lift off the frisket. I have kept this real time. This is the best bit, it really is. Just uncovering the polar bear. So now I can start working on him, her, the polar bear. So I wouldn't have done this unless I'd been completely happy with the background and midground. And I'm sorry, but the contrast and colour is a little bit off in this part of the video. But it gives you a good idea. So I've done with the pan pastels for now. So they've been moved to one side, and I've brought out pastel pencils. As you'll see during the video, I work with all different brands. It's only if I'm doing a review for a certain company, or just a comparison maybe, that I'll work with just a set brand of pastel pencils. But during this video you'll see that I work with a variety of different pastel pencils. Some of them are softer, some of them are harder. Mainly I'm just reaching for the colour that I need. So this one, for instance, was a Taylor Rowney. And as you know, I have suffered with shoulder problems in the past. Shoulders are fine at the minute, but I do tend to turn my work round just so I'm more comfortable when I'm working, and hopefully I will never have shoulder problems again. So that's Pitt pencil, Taylor Rowney, Pitt pencil. They are a little bit harder. That's just a blending stump, so that's nice to push the pigment right into the tooth of the paper. And at the moment I'm just playing with colours, not really settled on which colours I'm going to use, so I'm just having a play at the minute. That's got a pink tone to it, that pencil. So just playing with the different colours and seeing how I feel when they go on the paper. And if I don't like it, I just blend it right down into the tooth of the paper and then go over it. It's that simple. So artworks, when you're painting, doesn't matter what medium it is, contrast is always more important than getting that perfect colour. There's never any perfect colour really. That's a Carbothello pastel pencil. They're very good. They're the ones I'd recommend if you're a beginner to pastel, because they do everything, the Carbothellos. So just building up some texture. Even though these are base coat layers, I still like to apply them in the direction that the fur is actually sitting. And obviously the length of the strokes make a big difference as well. So you don't want long strokes, because if they do show through, they need to be the correct length for the hair that's actually on that part of the subject. So just using a mixture of creams, pinks, and later on there'll be lilacs coming in as well, and just blending everything down into the tooth of the paper. If you leave the pastel laying on the paper's surface, it'll take less layers, but by blending with a blending stump, it just enables you to push the pigment right into the tooth of the paper. It frees up all of the top areas of the tooth, so you can apply more layers. If you're having problems getting your paper to hold layers, it might just be the paper. All pastel papers are made differently. They all have different weaves and different tooth to them. I've tried just about everything I can think of, and I always now come back to the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. It is a little bit more expensive, but it just feels the need. It does exactly what I want it to do. I can build up numerous layers. In actual fact, I've never ran out of tooth with this paper. I used to, for years, use velour paper, because that could also and can also take multiple layers, but the pastel never sat. I don't know how to say it. Some would always fall off. Yeah, it wasn't as stable a paper. Whereas the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, there's no use for fixatives or anything like that. Once the pastel's on there, it stays, which makes framing a lot easier as well. You can get pastel matte paper, and you can also get pastel matte board, where the paper's pre-attached to a board surface. That's more expensive, and I only go down that route if I'm working on something really, really big. So going in with some warm greys now down the muzzle area. And this is working loose to tight. So I want to get all the base layers in, and then I'll start putting the detail on as I'm building up the layers. So really, this is going to look a mess. I guess this is the ugly stage. People talk about ugly stage of art, and no matter which medium you're working in, they all seem to go through it. And you've just got to trust the process really, and trust your techniques. So if you're working on a piece and you come to a stage in the painting where it looks ugly, it's just not finished. That's all there is to it. Just keep adding layers. If it's a case where you can't add a layer, try and figure out how to make the layer that you're stuck at work for you. It might mean changing techniques. It might be just building on your contrast or building on your hues and values. But all paintings in all mediums go through an ugly stage. It's just part of the process. And really, there's no such thing as a mistake or a failure. The best advice I can give really is just carry on. Because if you don't like it, it's just not finished. Okay, being able to turn the board back round again. When I get to the mouth part of this video, oh, it looks ugly. It really does. But it's just because they were the base layers going on, loose base layers, before tightening everything up on the layers that come later. So that's actually a very, very dark brown that I'm using there, and just sort of stippling. I'm not pressing on at all, just letting the paper do all the work for me. Just let the tooth of the paper catch the pigment. That's all I'm doing there. Again, in with the blending tool. It's stained from the yellow colour, but that's fine. That's not going to affect how it can blend in other colours. And don't sharpen these. If you've got any of these tools, these blending stumps, don't sharpen them. If they start getting frayed, and they will fray if you try and sharpen them, but if they start getting frayed through just general wear and tear, just put them to one side and pick up a new one. They're really cheap. You can get a pack of them for just £2 or £3 off Amazon, and they're ideal. You can use them with charcoal and graphite and all different things, as well as pastels. So just mapping out now where everything needs to go around the mouth area. And this is an ugly stage, isn't it? This polar bear is looking terrible at the moment. But that's fine. It's all part of the process. Going in with a bit of red there. Self-explanatory again. And that will all be blended down. It will all come together. Just trust the process. If you are struggling with visualizing what you want something to look like, there's and you're in a point in your project where you're frightened of making a mistake, then get a piece of paper, just a scrap piece of whatever paper you're actually working on, and just practice. If you want to use a colour and you're not quite sure, practice on a little tiny scrap of paper next to your easel and make your mistakes on there, so that when you go on to your actual project, you're feeling a little bit more confident. But it all comes with practice. I've been doing this for as long as I can remember, you know, since I was little. Painting and drawing, and it's just a piece of paper and some colours. There's nothing to be afraid of. So practice makes progress, by the way, not perfect. Nothing's perfect. If we did a painting or a drawing and it was perfect, there'd be no challenges left if everything you did was perfect. So when you've finished a painting, I always say to my students, congratulate yourself on something that you've achieved. Give yourself a pat on the back for something that you've achieved that you've not done before, and then critique your painting. How would you go about doing it differently? What would you change if you had to do that painting again? The polar bear's face is looking at an unusual shape at the moment, and that's because of the camera angle, that's all. The camera is coming in from the left hand side, so it is looking a bit skew-whiff. But yeah, critique your work. And if you're comparing yourself to other artists, that's got its pros and its cons. If you admire the style of another artist, that's fine. But don't pull yourself down if your artwork isn't as good as theirs, because for one, you don't know how long they've been mastering their skills for, and what products they're using. Excuse me. They might be using materials that are like 10 times the price of the ones you're able to afford. So that, twinned with their expertise, just might make their artwork look and feel better than yours. But everybody's journey is unique, and as long as you're progressing, then that's all that matters. And if you don't feel you're progressing, then I do suggest that you take photographs of your work, maybe over the course of a few months or even a year. And when you start looking back at works you've previously done, you should see that your skill level is increasing. And with that comes confidence. Your confidence will increase as your skill level increases. And when you feel more confident, you'll get better anyway, because you'll be less frightened of making so-called mistakes. And just remember, practice makes progress. Yeah, it's definitely an ugly stage, isn't it? And pause. This is one of those pauses. I might be having a coffee. I might just be looking at the reference material. When you are looking at your reference material, do try to really examine it. Sort of 80% of your time should be glancing at the reference material, and then just your 20% of your time working on your project. Because if you want to create something that does look realistic, and obviously this isn't hyper-realism or anything like that, but it is realistic. You can see that it's a polar bear and he's walking, you know, from the right to the left across, you know, snow or ice. So you do want it to look realistic, so you do need to pay attention to details within the reference image. And if you get something wrong, don't panic. You know, there's always ways of correcting, as I said, so-called mistakes. And the busier a painting, the more you can get away with mistakes as well. If a painting's really busy looking, you're less likely to spot something where you went wrong. Whereas if you're painting, let's say, a blue sky without clouds, with a red balloon floating in it, if you make a mistake in there, you're going to be able to see it, because the subject matter is very simplistic in shape and colour. But something that's more detailed, more intricate, it might look harder to do, but that shouldn't stop you having a go, because if something looks intricate and harder to do, it will disguise mistakes more easily. Mistakes will be less noticeable. Oh, I'm repeating myself. Sorry. you get the gist. So going on with the pink there, remembering that teeth are not white in nature, especially carnivores. Their teeth do tend to take on a yellow hue. I'm fiddling round, aren't I, now on that bit? Something wasn't right, and I can't remember what it was. But yeah, fiddling. It's just when you can see something and you can't, you know, something's not completely how you want it to be. It can be frustrating, and that's when I'll take a photograph on my phone and look at it on there, and 9 times out of 10 it just jumps out at you what you couldn't see because you're sitting right on top of your artwork. So if you get to a point in a painting and you know there's something wrong but you don't know what, take a photo on your phone so you can look at it on a smaller screen. Get up out of your chair and take a few steps backwards. Excuse me. And it should jump out at you. Or you could go and make yourself a coffee or a cup of tea, and when you come back, have another look. Because sometimes, especially if you've been working on a project for a few hours, it can all sort of just blend together in your sight, and sometimes it's difficult. If you come back and it's something that you've started painting, you've laid a few layers down, and then you realise that the shape or composition is off, that can be a little bit more difficult to correct. It's not always impossible, depends what medium you're working with. If you're working in acrylics, for instance, they're very forgiving because you can go over an area with the paint, let it dry and start that area again. But with this, if I'd realised at some point that the polar bear's eye was in the wrong place, or his ear or something like that was in the wrong place, it's a little bit too late and I would have had to have started again. So that's why I always encourage people to do initial sketches first, even if it's on just printer paper, you know, cheap A4 printer. Well, it's not so cheap these days, but you know what I mean, just on a piece of sketch paper. Get all your composition sorted out on there, get your sketch lines all sorted out on there, do all your erasing there, so that when you transfer your finished sketch lines over to your actual project paper or canvas, they're correct, they're as good as they're going to be. Firm foundations, that's what you want when you start your actual project. He is looking more like a polar bear now, isn't he? But I'll keep popping back over to his face and doing more to it. Again, these are just base coat layers that are going on. And if I wanted to put loads and loads and loads of detail into this polar bear, I would have had to have done him a lot bigger. It would have been a bigger project. And at the moment, I just haven't got time to work on... I've got the space now that I'm in the new studio, but I just haven't got the time to work on huge projects at the moment. All about layering. That's a lovely colour, that one is. It's an orangey brown. I don't know what it's called. I don't know the number of the pencil. It's just, I just know that I used it quite a lot during the making of the polar bear. In with a warm grey. Very light grey. But that's fine. If I go too light, I'll just go over it again. In with a white. Just lightening a few areas up. And pink. I do use a lot of pinks and lilacs. Shading yellow is lovely. If you want to shade any yellow or creamy areas of a painting, it's really nice to use lilacs, because the lilac colour is opposite yellow on a colour wheel, so they're complementary. They complement each other. They make each other pop. Mix the two together and you get a neutral colour, so I don't know if you know that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but complementary colours on a colour wheel are the colours that are opposite each other, and if put side by side in a painting, that's where they get the name from, they complement each other. Mixed together, they make a neutral colour. That's why some people, beginners especially, get frustrated when they start mixing mud, and that's probably because they've mixed complementary colours together and they just neutralise each other. I'm going on with white again just to lighten that area a little bit, and then blending it in with the colours that are underneath it. Just putting a bit of texture into that area now, so it doesn't look so flat. And as you can see, the eye, there's a hint of a colour in there, but that's it. Their eyes are very small in comparison to the size of the animal themselves. And this painting isn't big enough for me to start messing around with detailing an eye so small anyway. And when you're working with those blending stumps on a painting, if they get really dirty, then just wipe them off on a cloth, an old t-shirt or some tissue, something like that, and it just removes the excess pigment off it so it doesn't muddy up any lighter colours. Or even better still, just keep one blending stump for the darker areas and another blending stump for the lighter areas. Still not happy with that bit, so going in again. This is what I said about hopping from one part to another. Just something catches your eye, and before you forget what it is, just pop in there and make those little alterations. Using a variety of greys on this one. Most of them are warm greys, just so they go well with the yellows and the creams. The yellow on my screen is looking a bit green, but it wasn't. I don't know if it's looking green on your monitor. Might just be my monitor settings while I'm doing this voiceover. And another pause. Might be checking my reference image, might be looking for different colours, and back again. So there you can see I'm just using the side of the pencil just to put a very, very fine amount of pigment on. That's better. It's still being filmed at an angle, so his head still looks a little bit of a weird shape. Using the side of the pencil like that stops you from applying too much pressure, and that stops you from getting any harsh lines on the paper. So I'm just letting the paper do all the work, just letting the paper pick up the pigment off the pencil. That's a Carbothello pencil. They're a lovely mixture. They're not too hard, not too soft, and working it in the direction that the hair would grow. Now, just because one pencil stroke looks good in one area, don't just go ahead and do that same pencil stroke everywhere else, because then the subject will end up looking artificial. So just vary it. Vary the length a little bit and vary the direction a little bit, but always stay true to your reference image. And if your reference image is like a really good pose of a subject, but you're missing detail that you might need in your painting or drawing, then use the pose from one photograph and use detailed photographs for the rest of your project. That just comes with practice. The more you do it, working from different photographs of the same subject, the easier it gets. If in doubt, when you're doing your initial sketches on your not so cheap these days printer paper, you could play around with things like that. Get a good pose from one photograph and then look at other images to work out which way the hair falls on certain parts of the subject, and lighting and things like that. You can play around with all those ideas when you're doing your initial sketches and getting a feel for your subject that way, so that when you come to do your actual project itself, all of those things have already been sorted out. So what I'm doing actually now is I'm putting lots of lines on, lots of base coat lines with the cream pencil, and then I'm glazing over that cream pencil with other colours. And what glazing means is you're just tinting a lighter colour. So now when I go over with the darker colours, it's just tint. Even that yellow is darker than the cream that I'd put on to begin with. It's just tinting the cream. So all of the lines are under there with that one. And you can go back over the top, obviously, as well, to lighten areas. But then I'm going over the darker colours just to tint it. But not tint all of it. I mean, you don't want to spend 10 minutes putting cream markings on and then just cover it all up with one colour, because there was no point in putting the cream down to begin with then. But that's how I'm working that area. And there goes the pink, just to give it a bit of variation in colour, because obviously you don't want it looking flat. Back in with the cream. That was probably to lighten the pink a little bit, and in with a darker colour, and just glazing over some areas of the lighter pigments. Oh yes, like and subscribe. If you've made it this far, I applaud you, because we're nearly an hour in. So yeah, if you're enjoying the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help with the algorithms. If you enjoy my videos, and there's over 60 now on my YouTube channel, please please subscribe and share my videos with friends and relatives who may be interested. Obviously don't spam anybody with my channel, but it really helps if you hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and then share to Facebook or Twitter, or no, it's not called Twitter anymore, is it? But you know which one I mean. LinkedIn or MeWe, any of those. It really, really does help. And here we go again, using the lighter colours and then going over with darker colours, glazing. And you can glaze in watercolour, you can glaze in acrylics, in oils, and it's all the same. You apply a light colour first and then tint it with a darker colour. The lighter colours are normally neutral colours, sort of creams or beiges, very light beiges, and then you just glaze over it with a colour that you like, and you can build that up over and over and over again. And it's really nice working light to dark, because as I said, it's easier to work light to dark than to work dark to light, because if you go too dark in an area, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to get it back to being as light as you'd like it to be. Using pinks and lilacs. As I said, lilacs opposite yellow on the colour wheel, so complementary, but also it's because the polar bear's in such a cold environment, using pinks and lilacs just retains that coolness about the piece, even though we're using sort of reddish browns and yellows and creams. Using those pinks and lilacs just retains that feeling of the cool environment, for me anyway, hopefully for you too. that pencil's a Krita colour. They are really, really nice pastel pencils. Bought those sort of the beginning part of this year, and I'm really enjoying working with those. Bought the full set. I thought, yeah, just jumping with both feet on that one. But I use a mixture of Derwent, Daily Rowney, Carbothello, the Krita colour ones, Caran d'Ache, and they've all got different properties. They vary in softness, and in actual fact, in a brand range, some are always going to be softer than others anyway, depending on what pigments they've used, how much white has been mixed in with the pigment. So there's a lot of different variations within a brand, and a lot of different variations between brands as well. And really, it's just a case of trying a few, because all the ones I use, they're all open stock, which means you can just buy one colour, or you could buy just a few colours and give them a try. And they're all different. They've all got different properties, and it's just finding the one. If you don't want to buy sets of all different pencils, if you just want to stick to one set, it's just finding which ones are going to work best for your techniques. So popping back into the ear. Does need a bit more work. I think I'd forgotten about it. I was too busy enjoying doing some fur, and then realising that the ear needs a lot more work. But that's fine. Leaning on the glassine paper, which I mentioned earlier. And you don't have to just use one piece for one painting and then throw it away, because it doesn't pick anything up. You can use one piece of glassine paper over and over and over again on all different projects. Just make sure it's nice and clean. Wipe it down with a baby wipe or something like that. Dry it off with a piece of kitchen towel, and you're good to go on your next project. And also, when storing artworks, I always store them with a piece, if they've not been framed, I always store them with a piece of glassine between each project. And it just keeps them nice and clean and nice and safe, and stops anything from smudging or getting dirty. Building up the darks. So again, working light to dark, using the other end of the blending tool then. And onto the feet. So the rest of the body was done, as you saw me do the head and neck. So just defining the shadows underneath the feet a little bit more. I do come back later on in the video and add the complete shadow that runs all the way underneath the bear. You'll see that in a bit. And building up those lilacs so they look like they're cool shadows, which they would be because they're on a snowy, icy surface. And just having a play with some colours now. It's what I do, that's how I work. It's I try some colours. If I don't like it, put them down, put them to one side, pick up some other colours, try those. There's no perfect colour. If you think, like if you're doing a tiger, that there's going to be a perfect orangey brown, there's not, because your subject will look different depending on what lighting conditions it's under. So it's not really about colour as much as you think. It's about contrast, lights and darks. But obviously, if you pick up a yellow and say it leans more towards green, then you might try it a little bit, put a few strokes down and decide that's not the one you want to use. That's fine. And then you pick up another yellow that's maybe more towards an orangey tone, then that one might work for you. So, but colour doesn't matter as much as you think it does. You still want to get as close to what you want, but it's not the be all and end all. So putting those darks in just to represent where the bear's claws would be, but I don't want them so distinctive that they're going to shout out to the viewer, look at me, because that's not what we want. So that's why I went over with a lighter colour, just to tone them down a little bit so they're not too dark. Again, using the pencil on its side, so not applying any pressure at all, just letting the paper do all the work. Getting some darker tones in, because there is a shadow that's across this part of the foot of the bear and the front of the leg, and that shadow is being cast by the head and neck of the bear, and that straight away tells us where the light source is coming from, which in turn tells us where the shadows need to go underneath the bear if they're not in your reference image. So if you're ever looking at a reference image and you're not quite sure where the light is coming from, there's a few tricks you can use. If the subject, I'm assuming your wildlife drawing or painting, if the subject has a highlight in the eye, that can tell you where the light source is coming from. The only one that I wouldn't trust is if the reference image has been taken with a flash and then there's just a pinpoint of light in the eye. That's not helpful, and I don't like to see that portrayed in paintings anyway. But if it's more of a naturalistic highlight, then that can show you which direction the light's coming from, whether it's directly above the subject, in which case the shadowing needs to be directly below the subject, or if the highlight is coming from, say, the top right, then the shadow is going to be bottom left, that sort of thing. It just helps if you're having to use your artistic imagination to put shadows in and things like that, if it's not clear on your reference image. And this goes with if you're using more than one reference image as well. So if you're using a reference image of a pose that you really like, let's have a think, say a horse galloping. You like the pose, but it doesn't really show you much more than a pose because maybe it's out of focus slightly or the horse is far away. Then by looking at other reference images, you can try and start to get your head around where would the lighting be coming from, or where would I want the lighting to be coming from to make my project look more dynamic. So that's another thing to have a play with on your initial sketches. Okay, so I've turned him round a little bit so we can work on the body. So I'm nice and comfortable working at my easel, and the whole of the body now that you can see has been covered with cream base coat lines. So I've sketched in all of the cream, so it's very light. You can just about, well, I can just about see it on my monitor. I hope you can too. So all of the hard work's been done. And now it's just a case of glazing. So again, no pressure, hardly any pressure at all with these pencils. Just let the paper do the work. Let the pigment just roll off the pastel pencil and just glaze as we're going along. I tried altering the video settings for this portion of the clip just to get it a little bit more true to life, and it's not too bad. It's not looking too bad on my screen. Obviously it's not brilliant as it would match the finished project photograph on the top left hand side, but at least you can see how I'm working, which is good. So in with the greys, taking real notice now again of my reference image and where the shadow is on the body, because obviously if we were to do the glazing right across the body now, even if we use different colours of, I don't know, pinks and lilacs and yellows and creams, the body would look really flat without shadows. So we need to get those shadows in. They're really important. They give the body of the bear shape. And these are still base coats, so there's still detail to go on top. So just building up those layers, building up the colour, and because I'm going on very lightly, I can build up numerous layers because I'm not filling the tooth of the paper hardly at all. And if I use a colour in one part of the subject, and I want to continue using that colour in other parts of the subject as well. If by any chance you pick up a colour and apply it and it is completely the wrong colour, so if I was to pick up, I don't know, bright red, yikes, and apply it and I can't cover it up, then I need to use that colour in another part of the subject as well. For the simple reason is, if you use completely the wrong colour in one part of a painting and you can't disguise it, you can't get rid of it, you can't go over it, if you just leave it in that one area, it will definitely look like it was a mistake. But if you apply it in other areas of your painting, it now looks deliberate and becomes part of your painting. So just keep that in mind as well. And as I said, if you're unsure if a colour is going to work in a painting, then have that little piece of scrap paper next to you and try colours out before applying new colours to a project. That goes with painting or drawing, or working with coloured pencil or pastel, anything with colour. It's nice just to have that little piece of scrap paper to one side, but it needs to be the same paper that you're currently working on. If you struggle with contrast, so if you struggle with how light to go on something and how dark to go with something, then maybe switch over to just using charcoal or graphite for a while, where you're only working with shades of grey, black and white, and that might help you get to grips with contrast and how dark to go and how light to go. And that is a really cheap way of getting into art as well, is charcoal or graphite. So still going in with the lilacs. I want to continue now using the lilacs and the pinks that I've used in other areas of the bear. I'm working them in. That's one of the Cretacolor pastel pencils. Can't believe how nice they are, and they're really affordable as well. And they're open stock as well, so you could buy a few, try them out if you like them before jumping in and buying the set. Carbothellos, that's a Carbothello. They are wonderful. They're brilliant, nice wide range of colours. Faber-Castell, that's a Faber-Castell Pit Pastel pencil. They're brilliant as well. They're all brilliant. I have not come across actually a pastel pencil that I haven't liked, and the light fastness on them is brilliant as well, meaning they won't fade when exposed to daylight. Obviously, no matter what medium you're using, never hang a finished artwork in direct sunlight. That goes without saying, because everything will fade over time. But always hang on a wall where it's not going to be getting direct sunlight all the time. And obviously, if you are worried, then hang your artwork, when you frame it, put it behind a UV protecting glass. Some people spray their work with a UV protecting spray. I don't do that, but some people do. So there's all different ways, and make sure that everything you're working with is acid free, because that does help. So acid free paper, acid free masking tape and framers tape. And if you put a mount board around one of your paintings or drawings, make sure that's an acid free mount board as well. If you go for a really good brand like Daler Rowney mount board, they're all acid free. So they've got archival properties, meaning there's no acid in the material that will leach into your artworks and spoil them over time. Okay, so I'm probably having a coffee or looking through my pencils, and this is a pregnant pause. A pause in my work. Or I might have just been looking at the reference image a little bit more. There you go. And the lighting's a little bit better as well. Don't know what happened there. I probably went for a coffee and then came back, and the light in the studio, the daylight in the studio had changed a little bit. Although I am working under daylight bulbs as well. But yeah, that looks better. That's quite a peachy colour that I'm using at the moment. And I do go back through some of the fur I've done earlier and use that one in there as well. So maybe I just was hunting through my colours. Still not pressing on. It's really hard unless you're sitting next to somebody and watching them work. It's hard to visualise how hard somebody's pressing down or how light someone's pressing. So the harder you push, the more pigment's going to be released, and that goes with paintbrushes, pencils, everything, even digital art. The harder you push generally, the wider a line and more pigment is produced. Not produced, what's the word? Laid down on the surface. Making sure there's shadowed areas right up near his shoulder blades as well, because you've got to remember there is a skeletal form underneath all of this fur and muscular form as well, and you just got to remember all of that when applying the top layers. Now you can see the very, very light lines that I've applied that I'm glazing over, and this close-up shows you how the glazing goes on. So where there isn't a line, the pigment is going to go down darker. Where there is a light line of pigment, the pigment will go down lighter because it's mixing with the cream colour on the paper. Still very light hand. Obviously you can see I'm holding the pencil way back along the barrel of the pencil, so I'm not applying too much pressure. Looking at the reference image just to see where the shadowing falls on this foot. Using all the same colours that I've used in the rest of the subject. These colours are not on the lilacs and pinks are not on the reference image. It's just the addition that I decided to make when I started this project. And as I said, I'm going on so light that if there's an area that I work on that I don't like, that's fine. I'll just rub it right into the tooth of the paper with one of the blending tools and then go over it. Not a problem at all. And as you can see from this clip, actually, I've just noticed that the colours I'm using, or the colours that I used in the midground and foreground, are complemented because I've used them in the bear as well. Like I said right at the very beginning of the video, our subjects reflect their surroundings in their eyes, in their fur. Obviously you can't see it in the eyes of this bear, with the eyes being so small in this painting, but everything is reflective. So to get the same colours running throughout a painting just pulls everything together. It pulls the background, the foreground, the midground and the subject all together if you've used one or more colours throughout a painting. If I'm doing a close-up of an eye, I like to use colours from the surrounding areas of the picture in the eye, and it just pulls that together as well. So just going on with some white now, putting some final details in. And then I would step away and have a look, take a photograph, see what needs doing, and keep going back in. And there might be areas at the back of the bear that need extra work, or the front of the bear that needs extra work, and it's just balancing the whole thing up now. I believe that's what I was doing now. I'd stepped away and seen what needs little additional touches. And if I didn't have the glassine paper, I would definitely be using a mole stick, because I really do need to lean on the project to get close in to see what I'm doing. And the detailing is quite small now, so I would need some way of resting my hand. So without the glassine, it would be the mole stick I'd be using. And his mouth is looking nice and neat as well. So the ugly stage is over on that, thankfully. That's it, ugly stages that don't last forever. Just work through it. And trust that later layers will begin to look better. Moving down to his shoulder area and the side of his chest area. And if you get carried away and get too many highlights, that's fine. Just blend it in and go over with some darks, or you can just glaze over it with the colour that you need and tone it down a little bit. Not a problem at all. Always better to go too light than too dark. I'm watching the board across the easel there, so it's just easy for me to get to. And I've not got my head in the frame, thankfully, during this video. So at this point I've put the reference image away now, and I'm just looking at what my painting needs. We're not creating completely like for like. We're not photographers. This isn't going to look line for line, bit by bit like the photograph. As I said, the photograph hasn't got pinks and lilacs and things in it anyway. So what I'm doing now is applying a little bit more detail to mine, stepping away, having a look, what else does it need, deciding, going back and adding what I think it needs. Beauty is definitely in the eye of the beholder, and it's your artwork, so you make the decision what your artwork needs. Okay, going in now. So I'd already added tiny little shadows underneath the feet, but now the bear was in place. I needed to go ahead now and add the actual shadowing underneath him. So I know the light is hitting the top of his back and the top of his head. So the light's coming in from the top more or less, and so I need the shadow to be underneath. So really, really painstakingly light strokes. I didn't want this shadow to go too dark too quick. I wanted to remain in full control of this now that I'd done all the work everywhere else. So just mixing it in with the whites that are underneath that layer. So just blending it all out a little bit at a time. Excuse me. And I'm using Derwent Pastel for this part of the shadowing. Derwent Pastel is very soft, So holding it right back on the barrel of the pencil so I don't accidentally put too much pressure on. I don't want too much pigment to be laid down too quickly. So just following the line, that leg and I'm just underneath now is obviously lifted up, so it's off the ground because he's walking. So I don't want the shadow to go too close to that foot. I'll see it would look like a ballerina. It'd look like he'd got his toes on the snow. Not a look that I was going for. So just staying away from that foot, just so you can tell that it's lifted up. Going in now with it's like a very, very dark turquoisey blue. Turquoise, a very dark turquoise. And the blending stub again. Don't want any hard lines under there at all. So it's always nice to add a little bit because you can always add more. At this point I didn't want to add too much and then struggle to soften it back down again. So keep adding a little bit, having another look, and where needed adding a little bit more. And there you have him. Polar bear. I don't know why I've left the other one at the top. I think that hopefully that should disappear in a minute. And that's it, that's finished. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. It's been a long one. I've got an itchy throat now, so I need to go and get a throat sweet. But if you've liked the video, thank you for staying this long. If you've liked it, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Join me over on social media. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, MeWe. Yeah, share with family and friends, and I will see you all soon. Take care and stay creative. Bye bye.